And tomorrow we start a special series, The End of AIDS. As doctors around the world race to beat the disease, can they reach such an ambitious goal in some of the hardest hit places? William Brangham has a preview.
We travel around the world to South Africa, struggling to care for more people with HIV than anywhere else.
These are unprecedented around the world. We have to do something about this.
San Francisco, which has laid out a blueprint to get to 0 new cases by 2030. Atlanta, the heart of America's epidemic in the South, where hundreds still die every year from AIDS.
I think I have a better chance of winning the lottery than I have of ending AIDS in where we are today.
To a remote island in Kenya to see what's working with hard-to-reach populations. And Rwanda, once the site of a genocide, now giving birth to a generation free of HIV.
We need a generation of kids who will never blame us, who never blame the country.
Our series on the end of AIDS, starting tomorrow on the PBS NewsHour. San Francisco's gay pride events went off this summer like they usually do. Loud, colorful, and celebratory. But there's additional reason to celebrate. San Francisco, one of the cities where the AIDS epidemic first emerged and one that suffered terribly from it, has now launched the country's most ambitious campaign to control it. It's called Getting to Zero. Luis Canales is a living example of that campaign. Canales is HIV positive. He got infected having unprotected sex with another man 3 years ago. But, and this is one of the linchpins of San Francisco's effort, Canales was tested and then started on HIV treatment immediately after diagnosis.
Yeah, right away. And I think it was like the next day I came in and started my meds.
That, as a physician, is my goal. Get people on therapy for their own good.
Stephen Deeks is Canales' doctor.
Luis, how are you doing?
Pretty good.
This approach is called RAPID, and Deeks says the sooner the virus can be stopped with antiretroviral drugs, the better. But it's not just for the patient.
From a public health perspective, and I think this is really what's driving a lot of interest in the RAPID program, someone's on therapy, they can't pass the virus to other people.
Dr. Diane Havler of UC San Francisco pushed the city to embrace rapid treatment years before other cities did. She's also one of the architects of the entire Getting to Zero plan.
Again?
She says the idea that treatment should wait because of cost or side effects or fear people won't stick with it is outdated.
If you have a heart attack, you do need to take medicines for your heart, in most cases for life. We don't say, how do you feel about this? Do you want to go home? We say, you need to start these medicines now. This is a serious condition. It's the same with HIV.
Widespread testing and treatment for HIV is considered the single best way to curtail this epidemic. Treatment prevents infected people from progressing to AIDS, and it reduces the likelihood that they'll infect others. The Getting to Zero campaign wants to cut those new HIV infections in the city by 90% by 2020. That would mean cutting them from 300 a year now down to about 30. They also want to cut HIV deaths by a similar percentage, from about 150 a year today down to just 15. They want to get both down to zero by 2030. Of course, the best way to stop HIV is to stop people getting infected in the first place. So San Francisco is aggressively promoting its prevention strategy. Jason Lloyd is a 41-year-old gay man in San Francisco.
Your first and last name, please? Jason Lloyd.
He doesn't have HIV, and to stay that way, back in January, he was about to start taking what's called PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis. It's a daily dose of the drug Truvada that will greatly reduce his chance of infection if he's exposed to HIV.
There's always in the back of my head when I go to get tested, is the test going to come back positive? Because I do have risky activity, although it might be low risk, it's still risky.
Truvada was approved as a prevention tool by the FDA in 2012. Despite its proven ability to prevent HIV, it's been very controversial and it hasn't been widely embraced elsewhere. Some fear those who take it will engage in riskier behavior, though there's very little evidence of that occurring. Right now, an estimated 6,000 people in San Francisco are taking Truvada for HIV prevention, and Jason Lloyd is joining their ranks.
And so I'll start taking tonight. So we'll see.
Of course, Truvada is for those who are uninfected. Keeping those who are infected healthy and linked to care is another main thrust of San Francisco's plan. Max Rubin works for San Francisco's Public Health Department. For months, he's been making regular visits to see an HIV-positive man named Barry Stover.
Barry, morning, bud. How's it going? I found out I had HIV and I was ready to kill myself, but I didn't.
Stover was diagnosed in 2015 after years of living on the streets addicted to drugs. He's still using today, and the first few times we met him, he was supposed to be taking his daily HIV medications, but it wasn't clear that was happening.
I'm trying to take them, but I just don't like taking pills.
After their visit, Rubin walks Stover over to one of the city's health clinics. With regular visits, they hope he'll be more consistent with his medications.
No one is proposing that every single person with HIV gets a daily visit. However, if we want to fully control the epidemic, we are going to need to do that for some people, and it's completely justified. It's either pay now or pay later.
A few blocks away, Kenneth Grossenbach and his girlfriend Michelle Campbell are trying to stay on their medications as well. He's HIV positive, she isn't. Because he's taking his meds, she is far less likely to get infected. She's also taking PrEP, which gives her even more protection. It's hard to convey just how brutal Kenny Grossenbach's life has been so far. Born to a teenage rape victim, he was abandoned when he was 10. He says he's been selling sex and addicted to drugs for the last 20 years. Grossenbach admits he's had trouble in the past staying on his HIV medication, but now he says he's got a reason to stay alive.
What encouraged me to get my medicine and start my medicine is I found somebody that I really care about. You know, I found somebody that cares about me.
Now that we're together and we want to start a normal life, we need to start doing normal things.
To stop the AIDS epidemic, 2 years ago, the UN set an ambitious goal, and it's one that we're seeing implemented here in San Francisco. It's to get 90% of HIV-positive people tested, 90% of them onto treatment, and 90% of them to have their virus fully suppressed. Whether that's achievable and whether that'll stem the epidemic is still an open question. The challenge of hitting those targets became clearer when we returned to San Francisco 3 months later.
What is the reason to see the pharmacist tomorrow?
Because I have 0 medicines. Yeah, I need my medicine.
Kenny Grossenbach is now homeless. He'd just been kicked out of his place, and he stopped taking his HIV medication.
I have to say that this few months has been hard. I went completely backwards. I'm not really being too much on the responsible end for my meds or for my relationship. I'm, just trying to make it day by day.
Science Magazine's John Cohen, who's covered HIV/AIDS for more than 25 years and who helped us report this series, says Kenny Grossenbach is a testament to just how hard it's going to be to achieve the UN's targets.
Who are these people who are so hard to test, who are so hard to link to care, and who are so hard to get suppressed? Kenny's that guy. He's really tough on every level for the healthcare system. He knows his status. Linking him to care, he's been linked to care, but keeping him virally suppressed, well, he has a really hard time staying on his medication. And it ties back to housing, right? I mean, this is a guy who's living on the streets.
Steady those nerves.
But for most people, the Getting to Zero campaign has been working. This summer, 6 months after we first met him, Jason Lloyd was still taking the PrEP drug Truvada. He said some of his other friends take it too. They help remind him to take his, and it's all becoming very normal seeming. We caught up with him as he was getting made up for one of his drag performances. His stage name is Beyonda, Beyond Amazing. And contrary to the critics' fears about taking Truvada, the pill hadn't turned him into a wild risk taker. In fact, he'd been having a bit of a dry spell.
I've actually had less sex since I started taking Truvada than before. Yeah, I feel more like a Truvada monk than a Truvada whore.
Luis Canales has also been taking his medication consistently, and he's had no side effects.
Meds every day. Whenever any of my doctors need to see me, I go and see them.
Partly because of how quickly he was put on treatment, extensive tests cannot find the virus anywhere in his body, and doctors are now studying him to see if they can learn any clues about how to cure people. And across town at Barry Stover's place, more good news. After struggling to stick with his meds, Stover's been doing it.
I'm undetectable, so.
You're undetectable?
Yeah, that's what my doctor did. So.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
But things just keep spiraling down for Kenny Grossenbach and Michelle Campbell. They are both homeless now. She was kicked out of her place, and both are completely off their medications. HIV is likely replicating rapidly in Kenny's immune cells, and because Campbell is off Truvada, she's at high risk of infection. They said the main thing they focus on now is their addiction.
Well, it seems like since we've been out on the streets, getting high has been like the priority, just because we just forget about everything else.
Feel it all.
I really just want to get off the drugs and start taking medication and start living our life and actually be happy, because this is miserable out here.
San Francisco is still a few years away from its getting to zero target. Despite the struggles they face, Dr. Diane Havler remains optimistic they'll get there.
The worst thing that you can do is fail, but if you don't try at all, you're never going to have the chance of succeeding. So obstacles and barriers for me are just part of the journey and don't deter me.
Even as the city cheers its advances, the difficulty of bringing the AIDS epidemic to an end is obvious. Public health officials say after nearly 35 years since the epidemic surfaced, the world has never had this many proven tools so close at hand to fight HIV. But putting those tools to work for everyone remains the challenge going forward. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham in San Francisco. At this hospital in a remote northern area of Rwanda, a small medical miracle is unfolding. This district, still in the grips of an HIV epidemic, has not recorded a single case of mother-to-child HIV transmission for 3 years. Similar progress has been happening throughout Rwanda, outpacing many other places in the world, even many in the U.S.
We sat down with local leaders. We sat down with the Ministry of Health team of supervisors. We discussed how can we do better, just to have a zero case.
Right. Dr. Jean Nepo Utu Matwishima says they did it with a creative mix of medicine, technology, and what you might call aggressive neighborliness.
Rwandans, they tended to hear much to their peers, to the people they live with.
You listen to who you know.
You listen to who you know, and sometimes to who you share the situation.
To achieve this success, a fleet of influential women were recruited from local villages, and those women visited every pregnant woman in their area to make sure each one was educated and tested for HIV. If untreated, an HIV-positive woman will often pass the virus to her baby at birth or through breastfeeding, but HIV treatment can stop that. Using simple texting, the workers transmit results and information to the local health center, which then relays it to the main hospital.
When the SMS reaches the central server, it goes directly to these computers.
Dr. Utu Matwishima says working with infected pregnant women who are so consistently giving birth to babies free of the virus has been a huge source of pride for the nation's healthcare providers.
We need a generation of kids who will never blame us, who never blame the country.
It's a remarkable success for a country many learned about through tragedy. In 1994, one of the two main ethnic groups in Rwanda, the Hutus, turned on their neighbor Tutsis and slaughtered hundreds of thousands of them, often killing them with machetes. Millions more were displaced. Government agencies, including much of the nation's health infrastructure, were left in shambles, a ripe opening for HIV. John Cohen has covered the HIV/AIDS epidemic for more than 25 years for Science magazine, and he traveled with us for this series.
When I was here in 2000, they were trying to restart an AIDS program that had been completely destroyed.
So they had a good program prior to the genocide?
They had one of the leading programs in sub-Saharan Africa in the early 1990s, and it was all destroyed.
Destroyed at the very moment HIV rates were spiking throughout the region.
Everything was completely down, so it has to be built from zero.
Dr. Sabin Sanzimana was in medical school during the rebuilding. He says he hated going to the AIDS wards because all his training felt useless, the death so overwhelming.
Could not do anything to help them. What you could do only was to see people suffering without any help.
But Sanzimana is now leading his nation's HIV/AIDS response, and he says everything has changed. Today, health officials say 86% of HIV-positive Rwandans know their status, that 80% of those have started treatment, and 82% of those have now fully suppressed the virus, making them far less likely to infect others. Hitting 90% in each of those categories is what global health experts say will be a major step towards ending the epidemic, and Rwanda is almost there. Of course, the success of Rwanda's efforts relies in large part on people actually adhering to their treatment plans. Josiane Mokanyandwi is HIV positive, but she's alive and well, and the virus is undetectable in her blood. That's what's prevented her young son Prince from getting infected when he was born. But that diligence isn't easy. It involves long treks to the clinic, times she has to take off work. She's got checkups and treatment, long stretches of waiting and counseling, managing her meds. All of this, even though Mokanyandwi feels perfectly fine.
It took 1 month to accept my status. I talked with my family, my parents, and I decided to come. Now I'm coming every month, and there's not a problem.
As Josiane leaves, a long line of moms follow through the clinic. They're all HIV positive, their babies all negative.
Now it's time where we can say no more loss, should not lose any other life anymore, because this country will be only built by its own people.
The mother-to-child transmission rate has fallen so sharply in Rwanda that when the rare transmission does occur,
she refused initially to start on treatment.
Health officials conduct a forensic examination of each case to see why it happened and how to prevent it next time.
We still have new infections, we still have people dying because of AIDS, and we still have children who are getting HIV from their mothers, so we should not sleep.
John Cohen says that in the aftermath of Rwanda's genocide, the nation built an even stronger HIV response.
They had a chance to rebuild from the bottom up and to build a sturdy structure in terms of a health response. And they're starting to see the payoff of that.
So they seized an opportunity.
Yeah. You know, I hate to be Pollyannish about any of this stuff. It's hard to sustain the sort of response they have today. And the place they want to go to next is really difficult to get to.
The last and most difficult steps to end the epidemic involve finding those who don't know they're infected, as well as helping those who are on medication stay the course.
When they give me pills, I started to refuse.
These young people, part of a local support group, are all HIV positive. They were infected at birth by the virus that has also made most of them orphans. Most say they didn't learn their status until they developed AIDS as kids and nearly died.
Like me, the first time I know it, I want to kill myself.
Compared to adults, adolescents are twice as likely to skip their meds, take them incorrectly, or stop treatment altogether. This can hurt their own health and make them more likely to infect others. So keeping these young people consistently on treatment is a crucial goal for the country.
It was a hard task for me to take my pills.
Why?
The first thing, I could go off, play, and then forget that good time of taking medicine.
18-year-old Jean-Paul, that's not his real name, is one of those who needs help.
You're going to need someone to remind you. You're going to need a parent or a family member, relative to help you.
Like all these young people, Jean-Paul has been paired up with another young man from the group, Alexei Shimimana. Alexei is older than Jean-Paul. He's also HIV positive, and he's been more consistent with his meds. His job now is to help Jean-Paul do the same. The two hang out, they swap stories, they commiserate.
He asks something, what can I do? I say, this is your life, it's not mine. You know? You may take medicine in order to live.
They're talking from experience, so we're open to them. He told me, this is what you're going to do. You're going to change your time that you used to take your drugs to a time that it's not going to be an obstacle to you.
But there are logistical obstacles as well. His mom and dad are both dead. He splits his time between his aunt's house and an uncle's across town. Jean-Paul still misses pills now and then, he said, but he's trying. That's a lot of difficult things to deal with for someone your age.
That's part of life.
Part of life for an entire nation as well, one that's striving to keep up its newfound progress against this epidemic. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham in Kigali, Rwanda.
Finally, as the International AIDS Conference convenes in Durban, South Africa this week, we continue our End of AIDS series. As we've been reporting, public health officials believe that getting the overwhelming majority of HIV-positive people tested and consistently treated is a crucial step to ending the epidemic. But that's proven a difficult goal. But in western Kenya, on the border with Uganda, there's a small island where researchers are finding remarkable success with even the hardest to reach groups. Correspondent William Brangham and producer Jason Kane continue our series with support from the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting.
It's late on a Monday night. Fisherman Kevin Opio and his crew are heading out onto Lake Victoria on the very western edge of Kenya. They throw out their lines and stretch out their nets, hoping the tiny omena fish are schooling down below. Fishing these waters is long, grueling, dangerous work. It's also become one of the main pathways for the growth of the HIV epidemic in this part of Kenya. Opio himself is infected.
I'm confident that I got it through sexual intercourse and can say it was the time I was working in Remba.
Fishing crews often have to travel long distances to other islands on the lake and into neighboring Uganda.
I think there's a mentality among fishermen that life is not as important, therefore you can enjoy it and have as much sex as you can.
Dr. Moses Kamya is an HIV researcher who's been working with fishermen in the region for years.
You know, fishermen tend to have a lot of disposable income and, you know, they can buy sex very easily. And of course, where fishermen are, there are, you know, sex workers who hang around them.
The fishermen live on Mfungano Island, here on Lake Victoria, near the border with Uganda. The island's 25,000 residents live clustered in homes near the water, and fishing is the main industry. Largely because of this migratory fishing, it's estimated that nearly 1 out of every 3 adults here is infected with HIV. We traveled to Mfungano Island with John Cohen. He's covered the epidemic for Science magazine in more than 24 countries and helped us report this series.
Here in this region, the HIV prevalence in fishermen is incredibly high. I mean, we're talking on the order of 30–40%. That's something you see in people who inject drugs, and it's something you see in sex workers. But people haven't thought about heterosexual men as being a key affected population. And these fishermen, they are.
So to stem this epidemic, how do you reach this hard-to-reach population? Well, you try something like this. This is what state-of-the-art HIV care and prevention in Kenya looks like. You set up your testing team not in a clinic, but right next to the water. You do it at night because that's when the fishermen are coming home. You get a band to play, you give away prizes.
What we have done in order to have a place where people want to go test has made it accessible to them. We've brought testing to people as opposed to having people have to go for the test.
Dr. Diane Havler is one of the world's foremost experts on treating HIV. As we reported earlier, she's helping lead San Francisco's ambitious strategy to end the epidemic there, and she's helping run one of the largest HIV test and treat studies in the world here and in Uganda. The study, sponsored by the US, Kenya, and Uganda, is called SEARCH.
HIV medicine have been transformative for the individual. So what we're testing in SEARCH is, can we transform communities with treatment?
Not just individuals.
Not just individuals, the whole community. And in order to do that, one of the first things that we had to do was to figure out how to offer testing to every person, not just people who were sick, every single person in that community.
Kenya, like most governments in the developing world, only starts people with HIV on treatment after their immune system becomes compromised. But the SEARCH study is trying to determine whether treating HIV-positive people immediately, regardless of how sick they are, can have an impact across the entire community. But the problem still exists that men here, particularly fishermen, have generally been very reluctant to get tested.
We are not able to get to him. Yeah. Well, that's a challenge.
Dr. James Ayeko is one of the doctors with the SEARCH study.
Our system does not make health
care seeking a manly thing. So you have to get something extra that would motivate them, to come to care.
The search team also makes an economic argument to fishermen. If you don't treat your HIV, you'll get sicker, and it's going to cost you because you can't work.
If you're infected, you can stay out there. The disease will progress, you'll get worse, and then you might be brought in a stretcher to the hospital, which is not a good option. So the study is trying to bring the idea of we can keep you healthy as you are.
Fisherman Kevin Opio thought he might have gotten HIV, but even when he started to feel sick and weak and found it hard to work, he still didn't want to get tested.
It was fear of my past life, fear of the ladies that I used to move around with. It was that fear that kept me away from testing.
It was likely during this period that Opio brought the virus home to the island and infected his wife as well.
One of the things which sadly still exists in HIV, it remains a highly stigmatized disease. And people may suspect they're at risk for HIV disease. They may deny to themselves they're at risk for HIV disease. So it takes a lot of energy often for a person to go to seek testing.
At Search's community health events, they know the stigma of HIV and AIDS will keep people away, so they don't call this an HIV event, and it isn't just that. They offer testing and care for all sorts of health issues, diabetes, family planning, hypertension, as well as HIV. On this day, they even ran a boat race to attract more fishermen to the event. 6 teams of young men competed in a race. The prize? Brand new cell phones. But, of course, you couldn't compete until you got tested. Dr. Craig Cohen is part of the search team, and he says this broader health approach is more appealing for men.
I'm going there to make sure that I'm healthy, that my family's healthy, my children are healthy.
It provides cover in a sense.
It's not just cover. I mean, these other conditions, malaria is super endemic here, depending on the season. It also helps to build up a sense of camaraderie around health, so that people are understanding that the clinic here is here for everyone. Whether you're 70 years old or 50 years old living with diabetes, whether you're 40 years old and living with HIV.
Making the tent bigger.
Making the tent much bigger and understanding that health is about everyone. HIV is under that tent. It's not an HIV tent, it's a health tent.
But even after people are diagnosed with HIV and get started right away on daily treatment, the next challenge becomes keeping them in treatment. And for those who fall out of care, the search team will come find you. Today, the team is out looking for another HIV-positive fisherman who'd missed his last appointment. If someone stops taking their HIV meds, the virus will surge back, making the person sicker. But a resurgent virus means you're also much more likely to pass the virus to others. A person who's on regular treatment almost never does that. But they found the missing fisherman, persuaded him to come back to the clinic on the spot, and made sure he stayed on his meds. One more success in a long campaign. 2 years ago, the UN set an ambitious HIV/AIDS goal called 90-90-90. It said that by the year 2020, 90% of people who have HIV should know their status, that 90% of those people should be taking antiretroviral treatment, and that 90% of them should be treated consistently enough that the virus is suppressed, undetectable in their blood. All that by 2020. But here on this Kenyan island, thanks in large part to the search study, they've already hit that goal 4 years early. There are few other places in the world with similar success. Of course, replicating what's happening here across an entire nation or the rest of the world will require enormous funding and effort. But the search team hopes that by proving what works, they can set an example.
And I think a study like the search trial is giving out evidence to show that what was hypothesized is really going to be the direction that HIV treatment and care should go.
Having hit this 90-90-90 goal, the search team is monitoring their broader aim of creating community-wide change. The study has found that by treating people with HIV immediately, those individuals have been working an entire week more per month compared to those who waited to start treatment. A large percentage of the community is, of course, still living with HIV from before the study began, but far fewer people are dying from it, and the virus is much less likely to spread.
When people are taking a treatment that is changing a uniformly fatal disease to a chronic disease, they think about investments differently. They think about investing, for example, in their farming, maybe in their fishing, and they think about investing more in having their children go to school.
But John Cohen says this still may come up short on the broader goal of ending AIDS.
The whole idea of test and treat, it may or may not be enough to break the back of an epidemic. We really don't know. You know, it could be that you get to 90, and transmissions are still occurring at too high of a rate to really stop the epidemic from being an epidemic.
The search study here will be wrapping up by 2020. It's hoped that if it's successful enough, these practices will be embedded into HIV care more permanently throughout Kenya and Uganda, and perhaps the rest of the world. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham on Mfangano Island, Kenya.